So, barring unforeseen circumstances, this should be the last episode of Volume 1. We are almost to the end of the book, so let's get going. Oh my gosh. I should have my book set up before I turn this on and start recording. The Vanishing of Aegwynn, 600 years before the Dark Portal. After their battle in Northrend, Sargeras began twisting Aegwynn's thoughts. He pushed her to isolate herself from the Council of Tirisfal, drawing on concerns that she had always harbored about the Order. Chief among these concerns was something Aegwynn had recently discovered. The Council of Tirisfal's members were interfering in the politics of human nations. The Magi argued that what they were doing was necessary. Their order had stayed in the shadows far too long. With their knowledge and wisdom, they had the power to prevent war and suffering in the mortal world. Aegwynn, however, viewed the Council's shadowy activities with skepticism and unease. She feared that if she stepped down, they would choose a weaker guardian, someone they could use to pursue their political agendas. Thus, Aegwynn decided to stay on as guardian past her first century of service. She used her powers to extend her own life for decades longer than what would have been otherwise possible. Though some members of the council were displeased with Aegwynn's choice, they accepted her decision. After all, she had performed incredible feats during her time as the guardian. Over the next 100 years, Aegwynn's relationship with the council became more and more strained. Sargeras' subtle influence made her ever more paranoid about her fellow Magi. Her growing unease led her to construct a refuge far from the eyes of the council. Within the barren and remote Deadwind Pass, she forged the grand tower known as Karazhan. Its whereabouts would remain a secret from the council for many years. Aegwynn would often retreat to Karazhan to work in peace and quiet, yet the tower also served another vital purpose. It acted as a conduit for the potent ley lines in the surrounding region, through which Aegwynn could siphon power when needed. In time, the aging members of the council began passing away, their powers still held in Aegwynn's grasp. New sorcerers arose to join the order. They continued the council's practice of interfering with the nations of the eastern kingdoms. Many of these new members also pushed for a more hardline approach to deal with the wayward guardian and force her to relinquish her powers. During one of Aegwynn's rare visits to Dalaran, the council demanded that she step down as guardian or face immediate consequences. Aegwynn balked at their threat. Her distrust of the council had now shifted to outright hostility. She told the Magi that putting the fate of Azeroth in their hands was tantamount to dooming the world. Furious with Aegwynn's behavior, the council members agreed among themselves to take action. If the Guardian would not give up her powers voluntarily, they would force her to do so. The council long debated how best to accomplish this. Some members proposed empowering a new guardian, but this idea presented too many dangerous possibilities. If Aegwynn and another guardian were to do battle, the results could be disastrous for the world. Of even greater concern was that such a conflict would call public attention to their clandestine order. Ultimately, the council agreed on a more subtle course of action. They formed the Tiris Guard, an order of Magi girded with relics and armaments that could diminish the Guardian's incredible powers. After years of training, these resourceful and gifted hunters set out to find Aegwynn and bring her back to Dalaran. The Guardian eluded many of the Tiris Guard with ease. However, the hunters did succeed in finding Karazhan and reporting its location back to the council. With Karazhan no longer safe, Aegwynn magically sealed off the tower from outsiders. She then set out to locate a new refuge, one that neither the council nor the Tiris Guard would ever find. After much consideration, she decided to build this stronghold in the ruins of ancient Suramar, deep beneath the sea. Her dwelling, the Guardian Sanctum, would stay hidden from the Tirisgard for centuries. I just want to turn this off so I don't accidentally get any notifications while I'm reading. Okay, cool. The War of the Three Hammers. 230 years before the Dark Portal. Far from the hidden Guardian Sanctum, High King Modimus Anvilmar and his dwarves thrived in their mountain home of Ironforge. Over the centuries, trade partnerships with the human city-states had filled Ironforge's coffers with riches. Great architectural feats, such as the stone-wrought dam, attracted curious visitors from as far away as the elven kingdom of Kel'Thalas. Yet beneath the facade of prosperity, tensions simmered between Ironforge's three powerful clans: the Bronzebeards, the Wildhammers, and the Dark Irons. Thane Madoran Bronzebeard was the head of the Bronzebeard clan, the largest of the three factions. The clan, which formed the bulk of Ironforge's military and mercantile classes, considered itself the backbone of the kingdom and claimed to share distant blood relations with High King Modimus. The Wildhammers lived among the craggy hills and icy slopes outside Ironforge. Led by Thane Cardos Wildhammer, they gained notoriety, I think, as adept and incredibly resilient mountaineers. Considered uncouth by the Bronzebeard clan, the Wildhammers struggled to gain more sway with High King Modimus and to solidify their place among the ruling elite of Ironforge. Sorcerer Thane Thorison, by the way, the grandfather, was it, of Emperor Thorison, I believe, the card in Hearthstone. So this isn't the same guy. This is an ancestor of his. Sorcerer Thane Thorison ruled the Dark Irons, who inhabited the deepest and darkest corners of the subterranean city. Their long-standing practice of dabbling in sorcery, along with a penchant for secrecy and political scheming, drew the ire of Ironforge's other inhabitants. Thorison held firm control over the kingdom's richest gem and mineral deposits, using his wealth as leverage to protect his people and secure a place in Ironforge's increasingly volatile political arena. High King Modimus strived to treat each clan with fairness and respect, but his inability to ease tensions between the factions ultimately led to disaster. The High King passed away from old age, and before his eldest son could be crowned, the simmering cauldron of Ironforge boiled over. No one knows exactly who struck the first blow. War ignited between the three clans as each vied for dominion of the mountain. Bloody battles raged in every corner of the kingdom for many long and terrible years. In the end, the Bronzebeard clan used its martial expertise to drive the Wildhammers and Dark Irons from the mountain and claim total victory. Cardros conceded defeat and led his clan north. The Wildhammers eventually settled in a nearby region of marshlands. They carved out a great subterranean city named Grim Batol, one that soon rivaled even Ironforge in scope and prestige. The earlier defeat weighed heavy on Cardros' shoulders, but in time he and his kin accepted their lot and prospered in their new home. The Dark Irons ventured south to the tranquil Red Ridge Mountains. There they founded the new kingdom of Thorison, named after their leader. Although his people prospered, Thorison himself wallowed in humiliation. He dreamed of one day exacting retribution upon his cousins in the north and claiming all of Cosmodan as his own. After years of secretly forging a new army, Thorison launched a brazen two-pronged assault against the Bronzebeard and Wildhammer clans. The sorcerer Thane himself led the attack on Ironforge. He had bolstered his formidable Dark Iron warriors with legions of immense war golems and siege engines. The invaders reached the very heart of the city before the Bronzebeards finally rallied and pushed the Dark Irons all the way back to Red Ridge. Thorison's wife, the sorceress Modgud, led the second army against Grim Batol. The Dark Irons besieged the mighty fortress and called upon their dark magics to break the Wildhammer's will. They brought the shadows of Grim Batol to life, transforming the bustling city into a realm of nightmare and terror. Cardros led his Wildhammers in a daring counterattack and vanquished Modgud. With her death, the Dark Irons retreated south, only to find themselves face to face with the armies of Ironforge. Madaran had caught wind of the attack and brought his forces north. The Bronzebeard and Wildhammer armies crushed the Dark Irons from both sides, utterly annihilating them. In the In the Dark Irons, Madaran and Cardros found a common enemy and a new purpose. They put aside their old rivalries and marched their mighty host southward, pledging they would not stop until they had purged Thorison and his treacherous Dark Irons from the face of the world. As the Bronzebeard and Wildhammer armies drew near, Thorison scrambled for a way to defeat his enemies. He decided to draw the fiery power from deep within the world and use it as a weapon. Thus Thorison wove a great spell to save his kingdom. Yet amid his conjuration, his mind turned to the death of his wife and his recent defeats. Anger roiled through Thorison's heart. His rage grew so absolute that his spellwork breached the elemental plane and tapped into Ragnaros, the Fire Lord. Unwittingly, Thorison ripped Ragnaros from the elemental plane and summoned him to the surface of Azeroth. The earth buckled and wrenched apart. The Fire Lord's violent rebirth sparked a series of apocalyptic explosions that instantly killed the Sorcerer Thane and shattered the surrounding mountains. From afar, Madaran and Cardros watched in horror as the world was torn asunder and firestorms engulfed the area. They knew in that instant that Thorison had doomed himself and his people. Frightened for their own safety, the Wildhammers and Bronzebeards turned north and fled. In the years that followed the War of the Three Hammers, Madaran and his people rebuilt Ironforge. Cardros and the Wildhammers, however, chose to abandon Grim Batol. Modgud had cursed the great city upon her death, leaving it uninhabitable. The Bronzebeards offered the Wildhammers a place in Ironforge, but it was a conciliatory gesture at best. Madaran knew in his heart that Cardros was too proud to accept such an offer. As expected, the Wildhammer ruler set out to forge a new future for his clan. Some of the Wildhammers settled in a region called Northuron. Yet Cardros led most of his clan even farther north, into the wooded hinterlands. The memories of Grim Batol still haunted the Wildhammers, and so they decided to eschew the subterranean dwellings of the past. Upon reaching the hinterlands, Cardros and his people built a majestic city, Airy Peak, high in the mountains. The Wildhammers fostered their traditional ties with the natural world. They practiced shamanism and befriended the intelligent half-lion, half-eagle griffins, creatures that called the nooks and crannies of the mountains home. The griffins became emblematic of the Wildhammers, an inseparable part of their culture. Madaran and Cardros established diplomatic ties between their two healing nations. The great arches of the Thandol span were constructed as both an economic and a symbolic bridge between the dwarven territories. There we go. There's Airy Peak, Thandol span, Grim Batol, Ironforge, Gnomeregan, Uldaman, and Shadowforge City. Although rivalries and ideological differences would persist, the two leaders vowed never to take up arms against each other again. When Cardros and Madaran passed away, their sons commissioned masons to forge two great statues of the leaders. The craftsmen erected these at the entrance to the Southlands, beyond which lay the Dark Iron territories. There the statues would maintain a tireless vigil, their stony eyes ever watching over the broken domain of their nemesis. Ragnaros' rebirth had decimated much of the Red Ridge Mountains. A raging volcano known as Black Rock Mountain now towered over the ruined Dark Iron Kingdom. The smoldering wasteland south of the volcano was called the Burning Steppes. The yawning chasm to the north was dubbed the Searing Gorge. Ragnaros himself retreated deep within the blistering heart of Blackrock Mountain. From his lair, the Molten Core, he enslaved the surviving Dark Irons. The dwarves obeyed their elemental masters' every beck and call. They carved out a new fortress under the mountain and named it Shadowforge City. Within their fiery home, they would continue nursing their hatred of the Wildhammers and the Bronzebeards. The Anvilmar family's control of Ironforge came to an end with the costly War of the Three Hammers. Madaran Bronzebeard assumed leadership of the dwarf nation, but he did not wish to make an enemy of its former rulers. Thus, Madaran offered the now deposed prince of the Anvilmar family and his descendants a permanent seat on Ironforge's Senate. And now we jump to the Trolls, the liberation of Kazan, 100 years before the Dark Portal. After the Sundering, the Zandalari set out to explore the numerous islands that dotted the newly formed sea between Kalimdor and the Eastern Kingdoms. It was during these voyages that the Trolls discovered Kazan, an isle inhabited by goblins. These small, green-skinned beings were clever but crude. At first, the two races kept their distance from each other. The Zandalari had come to Kazan in search of a strange mineral called Kadjamite. The consumption of vaporized Kadjamite caused a range of effects, such as heightened senses, hallucinations, and increased intelligence. The Trolls greatly valued the mineral and saw it as a sacred component in their rituals and ceremonies. For centuries, they mined from the numerous Kadjamite veins running close to the surface of the island. Occasionally, they employed goblins to work for them, paying with shiny but cheap trinkets that the small creatures prized. The arrangement changed once the Trolls discovered an unimaginable deposit of Kadjamite buried deep underground, more than the Zandalari would ever need. Rather than dig for it themselves, they enslaved the goblins and forced them to mine under abysmal conditions. For thousands of years, the goblins suffered under the yoke of troll oppression, too weak to resist. In the end, it was the Kadjamite itself that led to the goblins' salvation. A cloud of Kadjamite dust always blanketed the mines. Over time, breathing it in awakened the goblins' intelligence and craftiness. Secretly, they plotted the overthrow of their slave masters, using what materials they could find to fashion traps, explosives, and other ingenious weaponry. The troll overseers were caught off guard when the goblin masses stormed from the mines, armed with technology beyond even what the Zandalari possessed. The revolution shattered the trolls' hold over Kazan, laying waste to their mining operation and leaving behind untold destruction. The surviving Zandalari fled, and the goblins celebrated their new liberation by turning on each other in a mad scramble to fill the void of power. Amid the chaos, countless factions and allegiances formed. The most powerful of these groups were known as cartels. When no clear winner emerged from the fighting, these cartels brokered an uneasy truce. Conflict would never really end between the various goblin factions, but for decades they waged most of their battles in the economic arena. The cartels ultimately turned to trade to sustain themselves and used their profits to amass ever more wealth and power. In ancient times, Keeper Mimiron had discovered Kadjamite and used it to experiment on various races, greatly enhancing their intellect. Some of these test subjects were members of a small primitive race that roamed the forest lands near Ulduar. Consuming Kadjamite transformed the creatures into a highly intelligent, industrious breed known thereafter as goblins. The destruction caused by the Sundering cut off the goblins' supply of Kadjamite. In just a few generations, their heightened intelligence vanished. Those goblins who had found refuge on the Isle of Gazan had already forgotten the role Kajamite had played in their old society. So that means that the goblins are the same as the trolls in that they are native to Azeroth and not created by the Titans. All right. Stormwind and the Gnoll War, 75 years before the Dark Portal. So we are getting close now. Counting down. Throughout the Eastern Kingdoms, the disparate human nations flourished. The smallest and most isolated of these kingdoms was Stormwind. Over the years, it found prosperity through the farmsteads that dotted the surrounding fertile region. As Stormwind's population grew, small towns sprang up in nearby Aegwynn Forest, the Red Ridge Mountains, Brightwood, and the breadbasket of the kingdom, Westfall. Although the land was relatively peaceful, threats soon emerged. Packs of ferocious but simple-minded gnolls saw their human neighbors as easy prey. These brutish creatures launched raiding parties against Stormwind's convoys, farmsteads, and even small towns. In response, Stormwind sent its valiant knights and other soldiers to diligently patrol the land. Stormwind City became a sanctuary for the beleaguered refugees driven from their homes. The fortified heart of the kingdom offered not just safety, but spiritual guidance. Over the decades, devout clerics from the emergent Church of the Holy Light had ventured south from Lordaeron to spread their faith. Upon reaching Stormwind, these pious individuals founded the Holy Order of Northshire Clerics. The kingdom looked to these clerics as a source of wisdom and comfort in hard times. While the devout clerics used the powers of the light to soothe the hearts and minds of Stormwind's citizens, military forces patrolled the kingdom's borders. Although their vigilance prevented major bloodshed in the outer territories, the gnolls would remain a danger. During the reign of King Barathin Rin, this lurking threat spiraled out of control. The gnolls began launching brazen attacks on Stormwind City itself. It quickly became clear that these assaults were merely distractions. While soldiers defended the city, Westfall farmsteads would burn. The gnolls assailed the city in such numbers that few soldiers could be spared to protect the agricultural lands. This was no ordinary tactic for the crude gnolls, and for good reason. Never before had an intelligent leader emerged among their kind. Packlord Garfang, a cunning gnoll alpha of the Red Ridge Pack, had spent years conquering other packs in the surrounding regions. Now he had an army of vicious raiders at his command, and the tactical wherewithal to use them efficiently. Within a year of the first attack, his gnolls had raided almost a third of all human settlements outside of the city. King Barathin sent envoys to beseech Lordaeron, Gilneas, and the other human kingdoms for aid, but they would not send assistance. Seeing no advantage in helping the smaller, rural nation end the threat. Stormwind was self-sufficient, so trade with the other kingdoms was rare, and its spiritual tendencies were seen as quaint. The humans of Stormwind would have to fend for themselves. The reluctance of the other nations to send aid infuriated King Barathin, and he resolved to take matters into his own hands. The Gnoll Packlord had been bold in attacking Stormwind City. Barathin decided equally bold tactics were needed to defeat him. The king and a small elite party of armored knights left the city under cover of darkness and waited for the next Gnoll assault to hit the city walls. When the raiding parties attacked, the king and his forces made their move, riding hard away from Stormwind City and toward the Red Ridge Mountains. Barathin's gambit paid off. The Packlord had held nothing back for this raid, but he had not accompanied his warriors himself. Like most gnolls, Garfang loved to let others do the hard work for him. But with all of his armies away, the Pack Lord's camp in Redridge was left exposed and undefended. Baratheon's party battled Garfang and his personal guards for a full day and night. In the end, it was King Baratheon himself who sank a blade into the Pack Lord's neck. Half of his knights had died, and the survivors had all been wounded, but Baratheon had finally ended Garfang's reign. When the Knoll forces learned that their leader was dead, they turned on each other. Several would-be Pack Lords battled to take Garfang's place. Yet none had his cunning or guile, and the Knolls thinned their own numbers, leaving them unable to push deep into human lands anymore. King Baratheon took advantage of the infighting. He rallied his soldiers and launched his forces into the Redridge Mountains. There they decimated what remained of the Knolls. Although pockets of the hostile creatures would continue dwelling in the region, they would never again threaten Stormwind as they once had. King Baratheon Ryn, known thereafter as the Adamant, was celebrated as a hero, and the kingdom of Stormwind entered a time of great prosperity. The victory had given Stormwind's people confidence that they could handle any threat that might arise, even if they had to face it without the aid of the other human nations. In the years that followed, Stormwind would become even more distant from the northern kingdoms. Yet, unbeknownst to the greater world, events would soon take place in Stormwind that would change the fate of Azeroth forever. Oh. Now, what's his name? Why is my mind blanking? Really famous Knoll. Legendary card in Hearthstone. Hogger. Hogger is a Knoll. For those of you who want to know what a Knoll is like and what it looks like. Hogger is I would say probably the most famous Knoll in World of Warcraft. So, that's what they were fighting. The Last Guardian, 45 years before the Dark Portal. Far from Stormwind, the Council of Tirisfal continued its tireless hunt for the renegade guardian Aegwynn. Waves of unflagging Tirisguard scoured the world to find Aegwynn and hold her accountable for her defiance. Aegwynn, however, remained safe in her sanctum, deep within the sunken ruins of ancient Suramar. Only rarely did she emerge to walk the outside world. At times, she would contact the Council of Tirisfal and observe its activities. Much to her dismay, she found that its practice of interfering with politics had become more overt and troublesome. Now the Council of Tirisfal was actively practicing statecraft. It was during one of those sojourns that Aegwynn crossed paths with Nelis Aran, one of the most dogged and unrelenting Tirisguard ever. He hounded the Guardian for months, using the enchanted artifacts at his command to nullify her magic and hamper her attempts to escape his grasp. These fierce encounters became like a game of wills and wits between Nelis and Aegwynn. During their protracted duels, the opponents bantered back and forth, seeking insights into each other's strengths and weaknesses. To Aegwynn's surprise, she discovered that Nelis harbored misgivings about the Council of Tirisfal. He was well aware of the Order's political machinations, activities that he did not condone. Nelis realized that Aegwynn was not the traitorous rebel that the Council of Tirisfal had made her out to be. As he discerned more about the Guardian's own motivations, he began to sympathize with her plight. Nelis also sensed that Aegwynn was wrestling with some unseen darkness in her soul. But for all of his brilliance, he would never know that this darkness was actually the lingering presence of Sargeras. Hoping to help Aegwynn overcome her struggle, Nelis laid down his arms and abandoned his hunt. Before long, an unexpected love blossomed between the two former enemies. They agreed that they would work together to prevent the Council of Tirisfal from ever having control over another guardian. Knowing she could not maintain her mantle of guardianship forever, Aegwynn proposed a solution to Nelis. They would bear a child capable of inheriting Aegwynn's Tirisfallen powers. Only then could a new guardian arise free from the Council of Tirisfal's manipulation. Nelis readily agreed, seeing this plan as a redemptive act for Aegwynn. If she could not purge the darkness within herself, then perhaps she could create an heir who would be free from her own personal burdens. In time, Aegwynn gave birth to a son. She named him Medivh, or Keeper of Secrets in the High Elven tongue. The infant possessed an incredible affinity for magic, a natural gift passed down from his parents. Aegwynn also locked her powers away within the boy's spirit, where they would linger until Medivh reached maturity. There was, however, something much darker in Medivh. The lurking spirit of Sargeras stirred in the child's soul. Though Aegwynn did not know it, the demon lord had possessed the infant while he formed in her womb. Aegwynn and Nelis searched far and wide for a safe place where Medivh could be raised. They ultimately settled on Stormwind, due to its isolated location and tenuous ties with Dalaran and the other northern nations. There, Nelis became the official conjurer of Stormwind's royal court. Having secured a future for her son, Aegwynn left Medivh in the care of Nelis. He would educate and tutor the boy in the ways of the arcane arts until the time came when Medivh assumed the role of guardian. Aegwynn herself departed Stormwind, retiring from her duties as guardian. The long centuries had taken their toll on her, and she could bear no more. She disappeared from sight, but always she would watch her beloved son from afar. Nelis's role as official court conjurer meant that the young Medivh was also a part of the royal court. As the boy grew older, he spent much of his time in the company of two other notable children, Anduin Lothar, a descendant of the Arathi bloodline, and Lane Rin, the Prince of Stormwind. Despite their penchant for mischief and adventure, the three children were adored by the kingdom's populace. Medivh cherished his friendship with Anduin and Lane, for their activities were often an escape from Nelis's intensive tutoring. Although Medivh excelled in the arcane arts, his father rarely gave him praise. He was a cold and mirthless mentor, constantly pushing his son to achieve more. Nelis eventually revealed why he placed such a burden on Medivh. He told his son of the Council of Tirisfal, the Lion of the Guardians, and Medivh's own secret heritage. Nelis claimed that one day the boy would assume the role of guardian. The fate of the entire world would then rest squarely on his shoulders. The pressures of his destiny and his exhausting studies tormented Medivh's thoughts. The mounting anxiety led to disastrous consequences when the boy finally came of age. On the eve of his 14th birthday, the stress building within Medivh ignited his dormant guardian powers. Fevered dreams assaulted the youth as the Tirisfallen energies howled to be unleashed. Nelis struggled desperately to help his son, but the incredible powers within Medivh lashed out, killing his father. Thereafter, the boy fell into a deep coma. For many years he lay unconscious in Stormwind's Northshire Abbey, tended to by clerics, and watched over by his faithful friends, Anduin and Lane. When Medivh finally awoke, he found the world had changed around him. Lane was poised to succeed his father, Barathan, as the king of Stormwind. Anduin Lothar had become a knight in Stormwind's military. As Medivh gradually acclimated to his new life, he recognized the awesome power at his fingertips and resolved to use it to protect the world from evil. Despite his strange coma, he appeared normal, and he assured the clerics that nothing was amiss. Even Medivh himself was unaware that Sargeras was still hiding within his soul, subtly twisting his every thought and action to a much darker end. At long last, the fallen Titan had found the perfect instrument with which to begin the Legion's next invasion of Azeroth. To be continued. And that is the last page. Well, there's an index. But that is it. We made it through World of Warcraft Chronicle Volume 1. The Tower of Karzan, future home of the Guardian Medivh. Well, thanks for listening. We finally made it. And I'll see you next time.